The next block is welcoming words, and first I would like to introduce to you Axelle Lemaire, Minister of State for Digital Affairs of France. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Dear President, thank you for your fascinating talk, and it allows me to think that Estonia really has grasped the importance of the digital transformation that the world is currently experimenting, and that it's not only about process, it's also about policies that we need to altogether decide on. So, except that if you compare France and Estonia, the first thought that comes to mind is that they have different sizes. So what was done in Estonia is more difficult to implement in France. We're an older country. You mentioned that the revolution took place 25 years ago. It took place in France 227 years ago. And we're a country of 66 million people. And I know that there are many representatives in this room of smaller countries, smaller islands. And I believe that you are sources and grounds for experimentation, and any successful experiments in your countries can then be scaled up in other countries such as France. Because whenever we want to change an IT system, we can't start from scratch. We actually need to update it. And so the vision we have in the French government regarding digital issues is about upgrading the Republican software. You might know that the emblem of France, it's liberté, égalité, fraternité. It means freedom, equality, fraternity. But what about these principles in a digital age? What we're trying to do is keep the source, the fundamental values that are behind them, but translate them into innovative policies in order to grasp all the potential of the digital challenges. So, updating the Republican software, it means to us basing our policies on 5 main principles. These are transparency, trust, security, innovation, and inclusion. And we believe there cannot be any digital republic without the implementation in practice of these 5 principles. I find it very interesting that Estonia created a new application on how to govern. So Estonia became a country as a service. We had the infrastructures as a service. You know, when companies or public organizations put their services on the cloud. We had platforms as a service. We had software, of course, as a service. In France, the farmers are now being offered to use tractors as a service because the challenge is to collect data and then use them for their full potential. Well, here we have a country as a service. And apparently that was an April's Fool. Am I correct, Mr. President? Is Estonia a country as a service? So it might not be an April's Fool for long, and I think that's the collective aim we should keep in mind. And interestingly, we also had an April's Fool in France when I was with the finance minister, and we decided to open up the source codes of the income tax. You know, this tax that people do not necessarily like to pay. They get very, very upset at paying, especially when it's high. Well, we decided that we would make it transparent and that all the coders and developers could access it, eventually identify any bugs, and that was a way to collaborate with the community of developers. This is not the April's Fool, we did that for real, except that 1 hour later we received alerts coming from different tech newspapers telling us that there was a major bug in the source code and that the state had to reimburse €1 to each and single French citizen. So that meant it would cost us a lot of money and it would be extremely complex. Well, this was an April's Fool, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep pursuing that objective of transparency. And we actually put that into law. So you might think, oh no, not another legislation, not another set of rules, but they're rules to open up the system. So in the Digital Republic bill that I presented in Parliament very recently, and it was unanimously voted in the National Assembly and unanimously voted in the Senate, which is the second chamber in Paris, and that might not be the image you have of France at the moment. Well, in that bill, we're introducing the principle of open data by default, which means that every public administration, be it at the national or local level, will have to open the data produced. We're also introducing the principle of opening source codes whenever it's possible. Every single French citizen will be allowed to ask to have the details of an algorithm when it's been used by an administration to take an individual administrative decision. We've also introduced open access so that researchers can put online the result of their scientific work and sharing after some time with the rest of the scientific community throughout the world, notwithstanding the editorial contract that they had with their publishers. So this is all about opening. It's not about regulating. And why are we doing that? Because we're convinced that data is the new fuel of the economy and of the society, so we want to build a country of data. They call me Lady Data in France. Why is that? Well, petrol, the principle of the economic value behind petrol and oil was that it is scarce. You know, they are natural resources, and so you need to be able to exploit them and to have access to them in order to fuel the economy. Well, with data, it's the opposite. The more open, the less proprietary, the more circulating data you have, the more potential for innovation you'll find, the more transparency and maybe therefore trust in democracy you will find. So data is more like air. It's not like oil, but it is the air that will be fueling the economy for the years to come. And what we're seeing in France is that the digital economy is really leading the return of growth. The digital economy is probably 6% of the GDP, just like exactly Estonia. Except that, looking at the recent figures, 25% of the current growth is linked to the growth of the digital sector. And the growth to be expected in 2016 in that digital sector is near to 3%, somewhere between 2.5 and 3%. So it really means that it's worth investing in the digital sector and in the digital economy because it can lead to an overall and larger transformation of the economic sector and of the society. So I mentioned 5 principles. I touched upon transparency. We also introduced net neutrality because we feel it's a condition for a fair economy and society. We also needed to ensure that trust would be present. And this is where Estonia is very interesting to us, because security comes with trust, trust comes with security, and we need to ensure a high level of trust from citizens and from consumers. And this is done by ensuring that their personal data are being protected. And again, we needed to update the legislation on personal data, because we know that the data that we provide online, they're not personal any longer, and not only. It's the data you use, it's what's your preferred music, what is your playlist, what are your preferences in terms of movies, what's the history of your online banking. That's the kind of data that we can now find online, and they're not strictly speaking personal information. And we decided to introduce the principle of portability of data, which means that anyone is allowed to require to get back the content regarding its users' data. And that is a guarantee for more competition. Because when you look at the digital economy worldwide, well, you have huge, big economic actors, and they tend to have closed ecosystem. And for smaller companies, it is very difficult to enter. It is very difficult today to start a startup in that new world, because this is being occupied by extremely big tech companies. And so what we're saying in France is that we need more competition. We need a level playing field. We need fair trade, because that's also a way to support and help the startups. But when it comes to data protection, we introduce, for example, procedures for the right to be forgotten to be applied in a more efficient way for young people under 18. Because if you put information online about yourself, the consequences later can be very harmful if you didn't choose the use that would be done of these information. We also introduced a new concept, which is the digital death. Because if someone dies, well, the person might still be alive, digitally speaking, and it was very important for the will of the people to be preserved and respected online, just as it is by law offline. This was about security, innovation. Innovation, of course, we're very, very supportive of any kind of innovation, be it in the private or in the public sector. We're introducing the concept of startup data. That means state startup. We're putting together teams of developers outside of the state and the public administrations with public policy makers, telling them, we have this big problem, you have 6 months to try to solve it by inventing a new digital tool. And we believe this is a new way of creating public solutions, but it is based on the externalities of skills and on the confrontation of ideas and maybe of values as well. So the public services in France are becoming more and more digital. Of course, it is complex because, you know, when you think of France, you think of the public service sector, right? Of the administration, potentially of the bureaucracy that goes with it. But if you think of France as a country where schools are free, where health is free, and according to the health organization, International Health Organization, it is the country with the highest level of quality in health services. If you think of transport and infrastructures, it is easy to travel in France and to travel for free, be it by train, for example. And we're now deploying high-speed broadband with optic fiber everywhere in the country in order to cover it by 2021 entirely. And these are the infrastructures of the future. So if you think of that country in a digital age, think of the power it can have at the condition that public policies are transparent, are efficient, which are the two main requirements now, well, I suppose there would be a level of trust and confidence coming from the French citizens that would be higher than it is at the moment, and this is what we're aiming to do. And in the private sector, well, the government created the French tech. And actually, we didn't create anything. It's not an idea we had in a dark office in the Ministry of Finance and Economy. No, not at all. We just realized that there was a network of French entrepreneurs in France, but also across the world, that were extremely dynamic, that were successful, and that wanted to be recognized for what they bring to the economy and to the French society. So we decided to label the local ecosystems, 13 large cities, more innovation ecosystems, for their capacity to have startups, to attract foreign investors, to welcome incubators, be them private or public, accelerators, for the work they do with larger groups, with big private companies on open innovation-based models, etc. And what I realized, and I've found it extraordinary, is that we have all these local ecosystems that even myself didn't know about, which made me realize that in France we're very good, I think, at savoir-faire, the know-how, especially with the engineers that are being trained in France, but we're so crap at faire savoir, at making it know about that know-how. And so that's also what the French tech is about, is giving a sense of pride to all these entrepreneurs who are becoming more and more successful, and also letting the rest of the world know about it. And when you look at last year only, we had 5 startups that became unicorns, so they could raise over 100 million euros in France with foreign investors. And that's what we're saying. When I hear that it's impossible to keep startups in Europe, I think European countries have to work together to become more attractive in order for foreign investors to realize that they're missing opportunities and that they need to come and see and look at what's going on in Tallinn, in Berlin, in London, in Stockholm, or in Paris. So I think if we all have that strong message together, then we can tell the rest of the world that the beauty of innovation is that it can be created absolutely anywhere, be it a small country, be it on the African continent, be it in Asia and South America, as long as you have a good connection, a good infrastructure network, a good human network, an innovative government. Well, it is possible to create innovation and to attract foreign investors if they're a little less lazy than what they've been so far, thinking that the rest of the world needs to come to them and not the other way round. So there was this question raised about the sharing economy. Should the governments support the sharing and collaborative economy, or should they stop it? I don't think that's how we should put the question. Of course, we all are pro-innovation here. And of course, in France, for example, we love BlaBlaCar. BlaBlaCar is a startup that became massive, and they're offering the possibility to share a car on certain distances. That's what I call the sharing economy. Is Uber a platform that offers a sharing economy? In sharing economy, there is the word share. So of course, it offers an amazing consumer service, and we like that, and we want to keep that. But is it protecting the drivers as much as we would like them to be protected? For example, to receive training if they need. For example, to receive free health if they need. For example, to receive social security protection, or to pay for their retirement. This is the real question. The question is, should they contribute? Should their employer contribute? For the moment, what the employer tells us is that they're not an employer, that there's no contract, that there's no social interaction between the employer and the employees. Fine, let's invent a new model. But this is what I call economy on demand, which is very helped by the creation of digital tools and platforms. And it's great because it does address some very daily problems, and we want to encourage that, but we need to be able to put the questions on the table. That's exactly what we're doing with Airbnb. France is the #1 country in the world welcoming Airbnb visitors and welcoming Airbnb renters. So it means that it is possible, but at one conditions, that they accept to cooperate with the state to collect local taxes, for example, or to ensure that people do pay their taxes if they are professionals and not only citizens. All this to say, the digital republic that we're building in France is about innovation, but not at any price, because we need to keep a vision. It's not because it's digital that it means it's the Far West, but it means that it is for public policy makers to update their own vision and to ensure that there's no lag, as the gamers would say, that the connection with the people is still well alive. And that's what we're doing in France, is trying to encourage the civic tech, the democratech, because digital tools can help reinvent democracy, especially at times where democracy is somewhat not in good shape in Europe. So again, that's a message of hope that I wanted to pass on here. And I think the French government is really involved in building a digital society, and you're all welcome to Paris at the end of the year, because we will be chairing the Open Government Partnership, and there will be an international summit in December that should be an important step in that international agenda to have a digital governance. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.